In war, none wins. Only men lose lives. Both Russia and Ukraine have suffered huge casualties to date. Understanding the losses that both sides have suffered, the UK, NATO, EU, as well as the whole world, asked Russia to stop its aggression in Ukraine. But would Russia listen to this global urge? If not, how many more casualties would we see? In this video, we are going to take a brief look at casualties due to the Russia-Ukraine war and how many more to expect. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Ukraine war. We are here to deliver you all the new political movements regarding the Russia-Ukraine conflicts, the casualties, strategies, and aftermaths of the ongoing war in detail. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon if you don't want to miss any of those. So without any further delay, let's begin. A quick look at logistics should reveal the restrictions that each side may confront in carrying out the battle, and finally, an assessment of each nation's information operations, as well as the morale of its armed forces and population, may provide insight into each army's willingness to continue the struggle, as well as the public's willingness to make sacrifices for it. Even for the Russians, estimating actual losses is difficult due to the large size of the battlefield and the complexity of various fighting activities. Russia declared on March 2, 2022, that 498 servicemen had been killed and 1,597 had been injured, and on March 25, it revised the casualty figure to 1,351 dead and 3,825 wounded. On March 8, a U.S. intelligence officer believed that between 2,000 and 4,000 Russians had died. 10 days later, news sources citing the U.S. and ally intelligence estimates put the number of Russians killed in action between 3,000 and 10,000, with one estimate calling 7,000 conservative. Taking the average of these two estimates, we get a KIA rate of around 3,000 to 3,500 KIA per 10 days. The Wall Street Journal reported on March 23 that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO estimated that the Russian military had suffered between 7,000 to 15,000 fatalities since February 24, and that overall casualty may reach 40,000. The number of 15,000 KIA around March 23 is improbable, since it would need a 10-day rise from 7,000 to 15,000 KIA. This more than doubles the KIA rate at a time when much of the Russian army was on hiatus. However, if the loss rate remained around the same or somewhat lower as a result of fewer Russian strikes in the remaining 10 days of March, a more realistic number for Russian KIA by early April is around 10,000. Estimating the number of battle casualties is also difficult. One dead soldier for every 3 or 4 injured is a current military norm for estimating the number of killed to wounded ratios. If the Russian military had suffered 10,000 KIA, this criterion would indicate that it has received between 30 and 40,000 wounds. However, given Russia's proven weak logistical infrastructure meant not only ineffective delivery of supplies to the front, but also the inefficient transfer of wounded to the rear, the current ratio of 1:3 or 1:4 for killed to wounded may be inapplicable. As a result, for many Russians injured, inadequate medical evacuation skills and the loss of the golden hour, the first hour of emergency medical care for wounded soldiers, might result in a killed-to-wounded ratio of 1 to 2.3, which is commensurate with Soviet losses during World War II. Furthermore, the most recent official Russian casualty reports showed a killed-to-wounded ratio of 1 to 2.8, which was lower than the typical military planning ratios of 1:3 or 1:4. As a result, a 1 to 2.3 killed-to-injured ratio estimates the number of Russians wounded at 23,000, assuming 10,000 KIA. However, Russian soldiers are taking additional casualties in addition to the usual number of dead and injured in battle. First, by mid-March, Russia has lost around 550 prisoners of war, with the number certainly hiked by early April. Second, given the severe weather, there must have been a lot of cold weather casualties, such as frostbite, trench foot, and hypothermia, as well as diseases such as pneumonia, flu, or COVID that forced troops from the battlefield. Third, accidents, vehicle wrecks, irresponsible weapon discharges, and so on, are unavoidable on any battlefield. During the Second World War, non-combat deaths in the Soviet Union accounted for around 9% of combat casualties, implying that Russian forces in Ukraine may have suffered 900 non-combat deaths, in addition to the estimated 10,000 combat deaths. Fourth, on a battlefield, mental casualties are not uncommon. For example, according to one assessment of American fatalities during World War II, 312,354 soldiers were released due to combat-related psychological breakdowns, compared to 671,846 who were physically injured. Finally, some are missing in action. those who are genuinely lost or cut off from their units and are trying to find their way back, as well as those who have purposefully absconded from the battlefield and have fallen back to a safe position to avoid further fighting, as discussed below in the discussion on morale. After 6 weeks of action, the overall number of Russian losses is likely to reach 35,000 troops, and when other circumstances are taken into account, the figure might approach 38,000. Higher or lower figures are possible, but this is still a staggering death rate for an army fighting in post-World War II conventional combat. The loss of personnel is exacerbated by the loss of material, significantly reducing Russia's military capability. Russian military equipment losses were assessed at 446 tanks and 824 armored infantry fighting vehicles and personnel carriers as of April 6th, according to the website Oryx, which methodically records material losses in this battle using social media to authenticate its statistics. Actual losses based on cautious methods are likely to be far greater, and these figures do not include a slew of additional destroyed vehicles, artillery pieces, anti-aircraft weaponry, and so on. In the short term, if Russia can bring fresh equipment to the battlefield, it has the reserve capability to replace those losses. In light of battle casualties and a limited number of reserves, the issue becomes, who will lead this replacement equipment if it ever arrives? In Ukraine's instance, President Vladimir Zelensky declared on March 12 that the Ukrainian military had lost 1,300 casualties in the first 16 days of the conflict. Because Kyiv had not issued any new official updates, casualty figures must be extrapolated, which means that, like Russian losses, they can only be estimates. If the Ukrainian KIA rate stayed steady from the initial official declaration, and a little dip for less combat in the final 10 days is taken into account, Ukraine may have suffered around 3,100 KIA as of early April. Because Ukrainian military medical services have access to adjacent civilian medical facilities, a 1 to 3.5 ratio for killed to injured may be assumed, implying that Ukraine has suffered around 10,850 wounded. According to news reports, Russia has sent information on 500 Ukrainian military detainees to the International Red Cross, including issues such as sickness, accidents, missing in action, and mental casualties. The Ukrainian military's overall casualty estimates as of early April were estimated to be about 16 to 18,000. For a modern force, this is also a high fatality rate, but Ukraine is in a better position to manage these losses than Russia, due to its capacity to organize locals, including an informal reserve of approximately 400,000 veterans who fought along the line of control in Donbass between 2014 and 2012. Ukraine can more quickly locate replacements for its fatalities when fighting on its land. Due to operational security measures, losses of Ukrainian military equipment are mainly unknown. However, the website Oryx stated on April 6th that Ukraine had lost 94 tanks and 171 armored infantry fighting vehicles and people carriers. True casualties are likely higher, but they have had little effect on the Ukrainian military's fighting capabilities, which are focusing on man-portable anti-air and anti-tank missiles, as much as armored and motorized vehicles against Russian forces. However, the Ukrainian military will need to find a method to rebuild its regular army infantry, armor, and artillery units to convert from a defense relying on small groups of troops and territorial reservists with handheld weapons to a traditional combined arms attack. The side, Russia or Ukraine, that can rebuild its tactical forces the quickest may have the greatest chance of gaining the upper hand in the next phase of battle. Russia's logistics infrastructure has been unable to assist Russian operations adequately, and this is unlikely to change in the coming weeks. No fresh Russian onslaught will succeed until its forces are resupplied, and no plans to bomb Ukrainian cities into submission will work unless enough ammunition reaches the front lines. Due to the West's reluctance to assist Ukraine with anti-ship missile systems, Ukraine's only port, Odessa, is exposed to an amphibious assault. Russia has opted out of the information battle in an attempt to sway foreign opinion, perhaps because it knows it would never gain sympathy. Instead, Russia has focused its public relations efforts on a more vital axis, domestic public opinion. Half of Russians now actively or passively support the war, and even Russian dissident Mikhail Khodorkovsky concedes a rise in public support for Putin. Ukrainian communication operations aim to rally domestic and international support while also undermining Russian military and civilian backing for the conflict. The typical Russian soldier in Ukraine is unlikely to have much indication that he is part of a well-integrated and well-led unit, and his morale is likely to reflect this. In the face of adversity, Ukrainian information operations have mobilized global opinion and fueled resistance. Accepting Russia's maximalist demands would define victory for Ukraine. The Ukrainian military would have to be thoroughly defeated on the battlefield for this to happen. This implies that Russia's political situation remains stable and that its economy can sustain a long-term conflict. Putin may come to believe that the only way to win is to inflict a massive psychological blow on Ukraine's national resolve. If Russia is unable to push Ukraine into accepting its maximalist demands, but refuses to discuss and compromise, it may remove soldiers from Belarus, Russia, and the Ukrainian regions it seeks to annex. These locations are most likely in southern Ukraine, where they will connect Russia and Crimea, or at the very least ensure Crimea's access to fresh water from the Dnieper River. Because Ukraine would never consent to this annexation, a Russian proclamation of victory and retreat to a constructed defensive line would force Ukraine to choose between accepting an unacceptable ceasefire or continuing the conflict. This scenario necessitates a near-exact reenactment of Russian history in 1917. Even if it wins, Ukraine will have to reconstruct and resettle its refugees and internally displaced people for years. Seizing Russian assets would, perhaps, help alleviate the expenses. This would necessitate either a field collapse of the Russian army or a political accord with Russia, most likely as a result of a change of administration in Moscow, in which case Russia would withdraw its force to ease international sanctions. The devastation of Ukraine's towns by Russia, as well as the consequences of international sanctions, may lead to a negotiated solution between the two countries. Zelensky has stated that he no longer believes NATO membership is realistic, and that Ukraine is prepared to make concessions on this crucial Russian demand. A negotiated agreement would allow Ukraine to recover while waiting for ideal conditions to reclaim the territory it lost back in 2014. With that being said, that takes us to the end of the episode. We would like to know what your perspective is concerning the current Russia-Ukraine scenario. Let us know in the comment section. And if you found this video useful and informative, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Until then, peace.